Passionate, outspoken, insightful. Ariva Martin is an award-winning civil rights attorney, best-selling author, legal commentator, and America's advocate. Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report.
Good morning and welcome to our viewers in the U.S. and around the world. To kick off this morning's broadcast, do me a favor. Please share the show with your online friends or start a viewing party. And remember, post a comment or question. Your voice matters, and I want to hear from you. Last week, Donald Trump went on Fox Business and said flatly that he isn't going to adequately fund the U.S. Postal Service so that Americans can't have what the Democrats or what he deems as universal mail-in voting. Let me start that over. He went on Fox Business to say he wasn't going to fund what he deems as universal mail-in voting. Now, this pronouncement stunned the nation, first because there's no such thing as universal mail-in voting in this country. And next, because he blatantly admitted to holding up $25 billion in emergency bailout funds, as well as the proposed $3.5 billion to supplement funding election resources. And he did this to severely hamper the post office's ability to handle what is expected to be a record number of ballots that will be mailed in for the November election. Trump's devious plot has been aided by his newly appointed Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, a Trump political supporter and political lobbyist. At DeJoy's direction, the U.S. Post Office has eliminated overtime pay. They've removed mail sorting machines and mailboxes, and they've even proposed a plan to increase the cost of mailing ballots for the November election. Democrats and even some Republicans have decried these actions as a blatant form of voter suppression designed to deny millions of voters an opportunity to vote in the midst of one of the country's worst public health crises. Now, yesterday, DeJoy backed off his plans to make major changes to the post office until after the November election. But Democratic congressional leaders and U.S. Postal Union leaders say the damage has already been done. Will DeJoy's actions of restructuring the post office deny millions their right to vote by mail in this critical November election? My guests today have answered to these questions, but before I bring them on, I must reflect on the first two nights of the Democratic National Convention. I first want to start by congratulating Vice President Joe Biden on his official nomination as the Democratic candidate for president. Now, VP Biden started this journey to be president in 1988. So I guess some would say the fourth time is a charm, and that timing and persistence are everything. Now, I was a part of the California delegation in 2016, so I was actually at the convention in Philadelphia. I can remember like it was yesterday, those 4 incredible days of parties and networking and big, loud, cheering crowds who were stuffed into stadiums watching these amazing political speeches. But this year, because of coronavirus, the Democrats were smart. Rather than trying to force people into these very unsafe, crowded conditions and stadiums, they had to come up with a new format. And like a lot of people, I was a little skeptical about how this was going to work, videotape segments, live segments. But to my surprise, the last 2 days have been amazing. And my aunt Alberta, who I talk about all the time, 88 years old in St. Louis, and one of my close journalist friends right here in Los Angeles, they both say this format is better. My aunt says for the first time she can actually hear the speeches. She didn't like all of that screaming and shouting because it drowned out the important speeches that were being given. And some pundits are already saying this may be the future of the Democratic conventions going forward. I want to talk about some of the highlights for me. Did anybody notice that Bernie Sanders maybe got a little makeover? I don't know, but I was checking him out, and the Bernie Sanders that we're used to seeing with his hair sticking up and his sweaters was in what I call a classic Armani suit, looking very, in some ways, presidential, maybe like a corporate lawyer, the lawyer types I used to work with when I worked on Wall Street. Some of his ardent fans on Twitter weren't too pleased, not just with the makeover, but with what they saw was Sanders, you know, uh, full throated endorsement of Joe Biden. But for others like me, I was excited to see Bernie Sanders coming into the fold and promoting a message of unity. The next thing that struck me on Monday night was this amazing video from this young woman. Her name is Keiston, and her father died from COVID 19. And she gave the most compelling speech about why we need to change the occupant in the White House this coming November. Take a look at Keiston's video.
Senator Kisa should be here today, but he isn't. He had faith in Donald Trump. He voted for him, listened to him, believed him and his mouthpieces when they said that coronavirus was under control and going to disappear. My dad was a healthy 65-year-old. His only pre-existing condition was trusting Donald Trump, and for that, he paid with his life.
Ouch. Yeah, that's a pretty strong statement. And it touched the hearts of, I think, millions of people who were watching her, again, talking about losing her dad to a virus that Donald Trump didn't create, but that he did from the beginning mismanage. So congrats to her. Kudos to her for telling her story and for putting a face to the 172,000 people who have died, sharing her dad's beautiful story. The next moment from Monday night, and everybody's talking about this, the late night comics, all of the big media outlets, and it's about my friend Michelle Obama, powerhouse. Take a look at what Michelle had to say about Donald Trump.
Donald Trump is the wrong president for our country. He has had more than enough time to prove that he can do the job, but he is clearly in over his head. He cannot meet this moment. He simply cannot be who we need him to be for us. It is what it is.
So remember 4 years ago, she said, when they go low, we go high. And that became a rallying cry for Democrats and voters all over this country. I think the new phrase, it is what it is going to be the new rallying cry that causes millions of voters to go out to the polls. And ironically, that was what Donald Trump said when he was asked about the 160,000 or so then people who had died from coronavirus and his handling of the crisis. So Michelle Obama turning those words against him. But look what Donald Trump had to say in response to that powerful speech by Michelle Obama.
She was over her head, and frankly, she should have made the speech live, which she didn't do. She taped it, and it was not only taped, it was taped a long time ago because she had the wrong deaths. She didn't even mention the vice presidential candidate in the speech, and she gets these fawning reviews. If you gave a real review, it wouldn't be so fawning. I thought it was a very divisive speech, extremely divisive.
Now, isn't that ironic for Donald Trump to be calling someone divisive? Isn't that a lot like the pot calling the kettle black, after all he's done over the last 3 years to divide this country, and then to suggest that somehow we're not intelligent enough to know what a good speech is, that it's a fawning speech. And if we gave her a real review, the reviews would somehow be different. Well, news for you, Donald Trump. We know a good speech when we hear one. And that was not only a good speech, that was a brilliant speech. Speaking of brilliant speeches and powerful women, Jill Biden last night on Tuesday night, what a powerhouse speech she gave as well. She personalized her husband, Joe Biden. She showed us a side of her that we hadn't seen before. I didn't know that she was an avid runner and that she, goes on these regular runs as a way to de-stress and a way to deal with all the pressures that come with, being in such a high profile position. And then she gave the speech from an empty classroom, again, highlighting what is happening to our kids all over this country as they're not able to return to school because of this coronavirus, as college campuses that try to reopen are having to resort to, distance learning and online learning. So much power by her just being in that empty classroom and reminding us that this president's approach to the coronavirus has failed on so many different levels. And then I think for me, when Jill Biden said that Joe put their broken family back together, after his wife and his daughter were killed in a car accident, he meets 26-year-old Jill Biden, and he has the job of raising two small sons, bringing in a stepmom, and putting a broken family back together. And Jill looked into the camera and said, he did it then, and he's going to do the same thing with this broken country. Again, it just gave me goosebumps listening to Jill Biden last night. And my final observation from days 1 and 2 of the convention, the roll call again in the stadium 4 years ago, when you're at the convention and they do the roll call where each state has to announce how many delegates they're pledging for each candidate. Usually people are standing up, they have silly hats on, they have noisemakers, they're screaming, they're shouting. Oftentimes, as my Aunt Alberta says, you can't even hear what they're saying. So everybody's a little skeptical about how this roll call was going to, come off last night in this virtual environment. And I have to say, it was amazing. Not only did we get to see people from all over the country, and we got to hear them, we got to hear how they were pledging their delegates, but we also had this virtual tour to see the diversity of this country. And again, I think it just speaks to the entire 2 days of the convention in terms of highlighting and showcasing the convention, the way that the convention is showing America how diverse the Democratic Party is. Shout out to George Floyd's brothers. The two of them sat there and talked about George Floyd and his legacy and the commitment that they hope that the Biden administration, if elected, will make to criminal justice reform. So that was another highlight for me. Tonight, big night, Hillary Clinton, Elizabeth Warren, and Kamala Harris all on one night together. So talk about girl power. Tonight's going to be amazing. And then obviously on Thursday night, Joe Biden will give his acceptance speech and he'll close out the convention. So I'm super excited about the convention. The last 2 days have been great. I know days 3 and 4 are going to be equally incredible. And we'll be back here on Friday with a recap of the entire convention. We're going to be talking to millennials on Friday and get their reaction to the convention and see what's going to motivate them to vote in this November's election. So again, kudos to the Democrats for pulling off what they said couldn't be done successfully, which is a powerful online virtual convention where you highlight all of America and all of our diversity. All right, moving on to today's topic. What is the issue with the post office? And what does it have to do with voting and the November election? My first guest is here to help me break down the issues. Welcome, Amber McReynolds. She's one of the country's leading experts on election policy. She's a former Denver elections director, and she is the CEO of National Vote at Home Institute, a nonprofit organization which expands voting at home systems in all 50 states. Amber is also the co-author of When Women Vote. Good morning, Amber.
Good morning. It's great to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for joining me. Can you help us better understand what your organization does to help states make voting more accessible and safer?
Absolutely. Well, our organization is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and our goal is to expand access to voting by mail across the country, and also help states improve their systems and the customer service aspects of a vote by mail program while ensuring it's secure, it's accessible, and it also works well for the administrators that are on the ground administering the election.
So I was really intrigued by a recent tweet that you posted. You went pretty hard on Donald Trump. You said he's made misstatements about voting by mail, and you called him destructive. Help us understand what some of the misstatements are that Trump has made repeatedly about the safety of voting by mail.
Well, I'm actually an unaffiliated elector. I've always run elections as an unaffiliated person. I've never been affiliated with either side of the aisle. And so I look at this, I look at election administration as well as, frankly, the Postal Service as being essential services that are designed to be fair, inclusive, equitable, and accessible for every single American. So to me, both of those institutions should be free from partisan politics. And the fact is that there has been multiple examples of the president and other folks as well that have frankly just put out wrong information about the voting process that I believe is destructive not only to voters but also to the election officials on the ground every day that I consider to be the guardians of democracy that are doing their best to serve the voting public, a lot like the Postal Service and the letter carriers and all of those that work so hard to deliver the mail for every single American to every household every day. This actually is not new in 2020. He also had made statements about the Colorado voting model way back in 2016 as a candidate. And at that time, I actually invited him as well as the campaigns. I always invite all candidates. At that time, I was running elections for Denver, and we invited them in to actually see the process so that it would hopefully explain to him what it actually entails, what the back end mechanisms are, how it works. But that obviously didn't happen.
So they didn't take you up on your invitation to learn more about how voting by mail actually works.
That's right. He didn't,
That might be
unfortunately.
why we're getting, well, in addition to all kinds of other reasons that he just makes false statements. I think now up to 20,000 or more he's made since he's been in office. But I do want you to explain the difference between absentee voting. Like Trump has already requested to vote by mail, in the state of Florida, both him and there are reports that his family and other key members in his administration. So why is it okay for him to do that? But yet he's suggesting that there's, some nefarious thing that happens when others are requesting, to vote by mail.
Well, so the best way to categorize this is there's a program in every single state that allows voters to either, whether they call it request an absentee ballot, request a mail-in ballot, request a vote by mail ballot, or not have to request at all, and the government provides and sends that ballot out to all active registered voters. So every single state has a program that allows voters to vote at home, and states call it different things, but the ballot itself is handled in the exact same way when it's returned to the election officials. So it's fundamentally the same process. It just might be different to request it. There might be limits on requesting it, or it might be a system like what Colorado and Utah and others have, where it's automatically mailed to every voter, which eliminates a lot of the administrative burdens that we're seeing come up across the country. So fundamentally the same thing. Again, all voters should have the same and equitable access to this process so that they can vote in a safe and secure way.
So ever we hear the president talk a lot about fraud and about the possibility that some foreign governments are going to, create a bunch of fake ballots and start mailing them into state election offices. Is there any research that your organization has done, or are you aware, being one of the nation's leading experts on voting by mail, is there any support or evidence that there is massive voter fraud when people vote by mail?
There's no evidence of that whatsoever. In fact, there's research that's been done on this. There's been collection of this information for more than 20 years on this topic. And the fact is, there is not widespread voter fraud. But what I would say is it's our democracy, it's our election systems, just like cyber hackers, foreign adversaries, domestic adversaries, any bad actors that try to interfere with the process. What's critical is that we're able to deter, detect, and then hold those individuals accountable. And that frankly includes also misinformation and some of the other things, that tactics that are used to discourage voting or confuse voters. And those sorts of things have happened over our country's history on multiple different levels, on multiple different occasions. And that misinformation and just confusion of voters is what's actually our greatest challenge to solve, because it's hard to track down who's doing it. It's hard to get a handle of it. Social media has exacerbated that issue. And it was frankly well documented as a significant problem during the 2016 election. And it's frankly hard to deter, detect, and then deal with based on the laws that are on the books right now in various states. But the fact is, in terms of widespread voters trying to do something to hurt the system or hurt themselves or hurt other voters, there's just no evidence of that whatsoever.
Well, if voting by mail has all of these safeguards that you've just identified, is it in some ways actually safer?
So in many ways it is. And again, I ran elections for 13 years. I ran elections during 3 different presidential elections, all which had 3 different models. The first was polling places with early voting and absentee requests. The second was an advancement of absentee voting. And then the third was a system where we mailed a ballot to every elector. And what we try to design is a system that works for all voters in all circumstances, while also enhances security mechanisms. So there's various ways to do that, but there's great examples of where states have improved their security and access over the last 10 years to safeguard the election system. And I would actually argue that Colorado, as an example, as well as Utah and some of the other states, have created and enhanced security over the systems they were running before. And there's plenty of evidence that demonstrates that, including the fact that Colorado was actually named as one of the safest states to vote in by Kristen Nielsen, who's the former Homeland Security Secretary, as well as various news outlets, based on the safeguards and all of the work that we've done to make that happen. So it's important, and I've been saying this a lot, we know what works. And so what states need to do now is replicate what we know works really well in various parts of the country, ensure that processes are sound, and then also create mechanisms for voters to track and hold election officials accountable for where their ballot is, but also collect data, like with ballot tracking systems, for instance. We know where the ballots are through the Postal Service as well as back to the election official. And systems like that add additional safeguards. And they're so critical, especially right now with more Americans choosing to vote by mail.
Well, if all of that evidence is out there, Amber, and it seems like there's a big body of evidence, why do we keep hearing Donald Trump and some members of his administration say that voting by mail is somehow unsafe?
Well, I think first off, perception matters with all things elections. And this, has been something that election officials have had to deal with for a long time. This isn't new. There's all kinds of physical, cyber, all sorts of different threats that impact the election process that election officials have to respond to and deal with in terms of the risks. So this has been going on for quite some time. And I think that frankly, it demonstrates a lack of understanding by some that want to talk and sort of share this information that's incorrect. It demonstrates a real lack of understanding of the actual election process. I don't think that I'm not aware of any election experts that are part of the president's cabinet or team members or any of that. So I think it's really important that they take a moment to actually consult with people that have run elections, that have done this process for a long period of time, and get a little more educated on the actual process that exists, as opposed to sharing bad information. Because that bad information, it isn't just Democrats or just unaffiliated or just Republicans hearing it, it's all voters. And so it can have a widespread negative impact on the voting process that is destructive to our democracy and destructive to the voters generally.
Yeah, you raise a good point, Amber, about having someone with election experience, a part of the administration and team. And that's what we haven't heard. We haven't heard someone from the Trump administration who has that kind of elections experience talk to us about why they believe that there's this, massive conspiracy to undermine the November election through mail-in voting. I want to ask you, though, are you concerned about what's happening to the Postal Service and some of the changes that Louis DeJoy has implemented, how that might threaten mail-in ballots?
Well, first and foremost, just like I said in the beginning, I think election administration and the Postal Service provide a critical function to our democracy and frankly have to be free from partisan politics. So it's about public service. I always use the analogy that just like a mayor in a city, They can't only fix the potholes so that only one party or another drives over the streets that don't have potholes. It's a service provided to all Americans, regardless of your party affiliation. So this has huge impacts on the entire population in the country, and I think there's a lot of negative unintended consequences for some of the things that have happened that aren't being fully thought out. And so I have full confidence the Postal Service has the ability and the capacity to handle the increase in mail ballots and also election mail generally. They have a massive capacity. Most people don't realize that they process over 400 million pieces of mail a day. And given the voting population, even if every voter in the country got a mail ballot, that would only add slight increases to their volume, probably negligible, and that they wouldn't even notice it. So I don't have any issues with capacity. I also, from all reports recently, it indicates that they have enough funding to at least put them through next spring. So funding is also not the issue. I think the big issue is the implications, the downstream impacts for some of the policy changes that have been made that have now been rolled back as of yesterday, which is good. But some of those downstream impacts are a bit unknown. And so, one thing that I do find that's positive that the Postal Service did, and I know this started before DeJoy came in as Postmaster General, and this is actually one thing that I've been suggesting they do for a while. I've been encouraging them to pay more attention to policies and deadlines and issues within each state and make sure that it aligns with what the post office's standards are for mailing. So they actually sent a number of letters out to secretaries of state, and some of those flagged some pretty significant policy problems in state laws. And we even saw Secretary Buckfer from Pennsylvania, who actually used it in a court filing to point out a deficiency in Pennsylvania's law and ask for more time after the election for ballots to be accepted. So I think those sorts of things are really good that the post office communicate when they see a policy problem with regards to a deadline, with regards to a postmark issue, whatever that might be. It's good for state policymakers as well as the secretaries of state to get those flags so that they can make the appropriate adjustments so that voters aren't disenfranchised. So those are some of the things and issues that we're tracking. And again, I think any downstream impacts is what we really need to focus on, whether it be overtime close to election day or other policy changes that could impact the delivery of not only mail ballots, but all mail that Americans are relying on right now.
Well, thank you so much, Amber, for the work that you're doing through your organization, and thank you for continuing to, sound the alarm about the importance of us having an election process that, allows everyone to vote from home, particularly in this pandemic. We know that the number of people who are expected to mail in their ballot is exponentially higher than even in the 2016 election. So again, thank you for the work that you're doing on this issue.
Thank you.
Amber talked about the downstream impacts of what DeJoy and the Trump administration is doing to the post office. So my next guest is one of those people who felt that downstream impact. He is an ex-U.S. Postal Service letter carrier from Buffalo, Minnesota. He actually quit his job after the Postmaster General cutbacks eliminated overtime. I want to welcome this morning Kevin. Good morning,
Hey,
Kevin.
Glenn. Good morning. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for joining me. So you actually left your job and you quit in Buffalo, Minnesota. Tell us why you quit your job at the post office.
Well, like you said there, the biggest thing was the overtime cut. It was very interesting through the holiday season, January, February. We were doing well. We would get, hours at the post office were just unlimited. The work was plentiful. You could carry as many routes as you wanted to, do auxiliary routes, do package runs. You could just, the hours were plentiful. But it just seemingly overnight, we started hearing about, hey, overtime's not going to be allowed. We're going to slowly, surely start cutting it. And I got away with a few weeks of getting 10 or 12 hours of overtime, which was essential for providing for my family. Like I said, I got away with a few weeks of that, but I pretty much got told that, hey, it's over. We're going to stop you at 40 or your evaluated route time, which was about 45 hours, and you're going to be done. So sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. So I just wanted to ask you, Kevin. So we know that you, like a lot of people who worked at the post office, when those hours were cut, you said there was unrealistic pressures that were put on you and your coworkers. I think it's been described as, it's been ugly in terms of, how postal workers have described what happened after those hours, those overtime hours were cut. Did you see, in addition to the pressure being placed on yourself and other postal workers, an impact on the mail delivery because of these overtime cuts?
Oh, big time, big time, big time. It used to be the post office was ran, um, almost military like, and just to make sure a lot of those workers, the people that work at the post office are, phenomenal people. These guys care about their job, and some of the stuff that your previous guest Amber said, I can tell she knows what she's talking about, and they care about their job. So they want to do the best they can to deliver every piece of mail every day on time. There's no biasness. They have a job and they want to do it as best as possible. But the problem is, as you start cutting overtime, you start cutting the ability for different positions, RCAs, different subs, to be able to chip in and help. If they can't do that because they can't reach into overtime, you're going to start to stack up mail. Your efficiency is going to, take a hit. You're basically asking people to do an amount of work in a time frame that's just not achievable. And you're burning these people out that are already working. Some of these guys are still stuck having to work 6 days a week because of the lack of subs, because subs are heading out the door because they can't get enough hours. So it's tough. I don't know what else to say. I mean, having been on the inside and taken a look around, these are very good people that are just being toyed with.
I want to bring in Omar Gonzalez into the conversation because he's the regional coordinator for the Association of Postal Workers, a union representing 220,000 U.S. Postal workers around the country. Good morning, Omar.
Good morning.
So you heard Kevin and you heard him talk about the working conditions and the stress being put on workers because overtime was cut, as well as the impact of cutting those hours on the delivery of mail. What has your union done to address the issues that Kevin just identified?
Well, one of the things is we've exposed it. We worked very hard at exposing the new policies, or what they call the pivots of the Postmaster General. For instance, in mail processing plants, we've exposed the basically trashing of automated equipment. We've also exposed the policy where the truck leaves the processing center to the retail units, whether it has mail in it or not. And where before, if the dispatch was just a little late, you wait for it. You wait to make sure the mail gets to the delivery units to be delivered. And that was causing alarm because mail was just stacking up. So yeah, we've worked at exposing it. We've also met with our congressional representatives and anybody else who will listen about what was going on. And so we also have alerted our members to do the best they can because it was being also, those pressure being put on a retail unit clerks on the windows. Where's my mail? The will call windows. People would come up to the will call. Where is my mail? I'm talking about a line, a block long to get their mail. So a lot of frustrations. And managers weren't really dealing with it. They were letting the employees deal with it. And so some carriers were being accosted on the street. Where's my mail? And so you try to explain to our customers, look, it's the way it's being managed is the problem. And as Kevin has said, postal workers are very resilient. I mean, we deliver mail through fires, earthquakes, storms, hurricanes, even riots. I mean, we get the mail, we get the work done. So to anything that hampers our our assigned duties is just so frustrating to postal workers.
Yeah,
Um, Go ahead.
I want to ask you, Omar, it's not just the elimination of overtime that Kevin talked about. We also have heard these stories about major, big complex sorting machines being, destroyed or dismantled or taken out of post offices. Kevin, did you work where you worked, your particular post office, where did you see machines being taken out of your post office?
So where I worked at was just a facility where the mail comes in, we organize it, we get it ready to ship out. The sorting machines themselves, which is interesting, I toured a facility up in Waite Park, Minnesota, that deals with the sorting, where the mail comes in, it's sorted, it's put in DPS orders, ready to head out. And I just toured that place. It was last November or so, and I remember looking at these machines, and this has been a part that actually has. I'm glad you brought this up, because this has kind of struck a nerve with me. Is I've heard them talking about messing with these machines, and these machines at these facilities they're quite frankly amazing to watch. The volume of mail that they can process and put into DPS orders that the carrier can take it out. What that machine could do, in my mind, that is the essential heart of the post office, where, like your previous guest mentioned, that the amount of mail that they carry on a daily basis is incredible. And these machines make that possible. So if you mess with these things or sabotage these machines, or do anything to these machines, you're literally messing with the very heart and soul of the post office, the very part that can make it function. So although I didn't work with those machines on a daily basis, I know how they work. I know I'm familiar with the location up here in Minnesota in Waite Park that does that. And there was a tech that had worked there he was over 30 years. It was his responsibility to manage those machines. He knew what he was doing. The mail would come in. It was just incredibly efficient. And I could see, if you wanted to mess with the post office and cause any type of delay, there is the very heart and soul of the post office. If you want to attack it from like a mechanical efficiency standpoint, that's where you would attack it from.
I want to bring into the conversation now Richard Geddes. He's a professor of policy analysis and management at Cornell University. Good morning, Rick. Can we get Rick into the conversation, Rashad? Good morning, Rick.
Good morning.
So I know you have been quoted, Rick, as saying that the post office had problems long before DeJoy, the political appointee of Donald Trump, the guy that's given close to $2 million to Donald Trump, who was a political lobbyist who had absolutely no experience working in the post office, was appointed to this job. But you said the post office crisis began long before his appointment.
Yep.
Are we seeing something with the restructuring that has been going on under DeJoy? Are we seeing something nefarious?
Well, honestly, I don't think so. I understand how people could impute a nefarious motive to it, Areva, but I'm happy to tell you how the Postal Service got into this situation, which has really not just been years, but actually decades in the making. Think about what the Postal Service does. Its core business is the delivery of physical matter, right? But it's mainly first-class cards and letters. First-class mail is its most profitable class. So, Reva, that actually peaked. The volume of first-class mail peaked in 2001, and it's declined by 47%, so almost half since then. And probably all of your viewers know exactly why, because few people send stamped cards and letters anymore. You use a phone, email, text, etc., to communicate. So you've got this decline in their revenue from their most profitable class. But Reva, one thing to keep in mind, I really admire the Postal Service.
Stop you right there, Rick.
Yeah.
So what? You have a decline in revenue. It's a governmental agency, dates back to 1775. There are lots of governmental agencies that lose money, that are not expected to be profitable. So why, this pressure on the post office to do something that all other governmental entities don't do?
So two points to that, Ariva. One is it's the Postal Service. It used to be the Post Office. The modern Postal Service was created in a 1970 act called the Postal Reorganization Act. By statute, under that act, the U.S. Postal Service is supposed to break even, meaning the rates and fees it collects from postage are supposed to cover its costs. It's also supposed to act in a business-like manner, right? And it's defined as an independent agency within the executive branch. But there's a more important point, Ariva. It has something called a universal service obligation. We call it the USO. And it's actually quite an admirable thing. It's supposed to deliver to basically every address in the United States 6 days a week. That includes Saturday. But to meet the USO, the Postal Service has to maintain a relatively high fixed cost structure with taking the routes around every day, the trucks, the postal workers who walk the routes, the sorting centers. So they maintain this high and fixed cost in the face of declining revenue. The third thing, and then I'll stop, is the 2006 Act that a lot of people are aware of. It's called the Postal Reorganization and Advancement Act, is PAEA, an Enhancement Act, sorry. Highly regulated the rates that the Postal Service is able to charge on its what they call market dominant or monopolized first-class activities. So it's really constrained on the revenue side, but the costs are high. It lost $2.2 billion in its third quarter, ended September 30th. So the Postal Service is in tough shape, and that's because I think of an unfortunate policy situation.
So when you hear Omar, Rick make the case that the Postal Service is in bad shape, that it had a mandate to break even, that it's not breaking even, that it's, in the red $2 billion. What does that say to you, that any of this is justified? It says to me, so what, on one level, when we think about the waste, fraud, and mismanagement that happens in government, we're talking about, the basic form of communication.
Yeah.
People, my aunt who can't get her mail doesn't care that now Donald Trump decides he wants to balance the budget on the backs of the postal workers. What about you, Omar? What are your workers? Are they buying that this is all about a fiscal crisis for the
Well, first of all, you can go all the way back to George Washington, Jefferson, and Hamilton arguing about the post office and the revenues and whether the Treasury will be involved and things like that. We have a history. We have the Postal Act of 1792 that made it and expanded services to the American public, helped bind this country together. People like to say, "Oh, nobody uses the mail. Only 38% of the population use." Well, that's 118 million people that use it. And so to say that that it's being diverted by electronic mail, you can't text a parcel. Okay, so it is a service. It's always been a service, going back to laws that were enacted in 1950s that made it, expanded it so that the urban centers would also help the mail service in the rural areas. So we got a history. The history of the Postal Service is the history of the country. And so you start chipping away at the United States Postal Service, you start chipping away at the framework of this country. In fact, the post office preceded the Constitution. The Constitution has references to the post office. And whether you call it the Post Office Department or the United States Postal Service, it's still the people's post office. Don't mess with it. Don't mess with it for so many things. And people like to say, "Oh, it's losing money, it's losing money." The math, postal math, is the funny kind of math. In some situations, they actually make money. It's not until we have to pay into the postal funding, the funding of health benefits into the future that no other agency has to do, that the post office starts losing money. Is it mismanaged? I believe it is. Does it waste money? I believe it does. Yes, it does. But when it comes right down to it, you get a lot of bang for your 55 cents. You get a lot of bang, but what we can't have is a degradation of service, whether it's political reasons, policy reasons, or any other reasons. We don't need obstacles in our way as postal workers to get our job done.
And Rick, I do thank you, Omar, for giving us that history. And I think that's so important because so many people don't know that the post office, as you just said existed before the Constitution. And Rick, I didn't mean to be flippant about saying I don't care. I'm an economics major, so I do get economics,
Good.
and I'm a lawyer, so I understand, balance sheets. But I do think there is a frustration that I feel, that many Americans feel, that these issues about the fiscal condition of the post office are being used as a tool really to hide what Donald Trump was so blatant in stating on Fox Business, which is he does not want to fund or fix the Postal Service because he does not want people to have access to mail in ballots. So, how do you respond to that? We have this fiscal challenge, which Omar acknowledges too, but we also have the president saying he is purposely playing around with the Postal Service to impact the November election.
Yeah. So, Ariva, I don't have any special insights into Donald Trump's motivations or his relationship with Postmaster General, but a couple things. So, you just, if you're going to meet the conditions of the statute, which is that the Postal Service is supposed to break even over time. So, keep in mind, Ariva, one reason why President Johnson created the Capitol Commission to study reform of the old post office is because it was losing so much money year after year, and Congress had to write a check every year to keep it going. So we have to figure out ways in the face of declining most profitable class. What Omar said is true about parcels, but they don't make as much money off parcels, and they face competition from FedEx and UPS in parcel delivery. So you have to look for other ways to keep costs down.
I got to get you focused on this question about the election, because
Yeah.
we are
So
screaming about the problems. But before I let you answer that, I want to go
but
back.
let me say one thing. The reduction. Yes. Okay.
Hold your thought. I promise I'll get back to you.
Okay.
Kevin,
Good.
waiting patiently, and I just want to ask you one last question, Kevin, before I let you go.
Yeah.
I know that you said you didn't work in a post office where those big sorting machines were removed, but we also have seen the removal of these blue, the blue post drop boxes that are in all of our neighborhoods on corners all over this country. We've seen, flatbed trucks coming through neighborhoods, picking them up. Did you experience any of that in Buffalo, Minnesota, where you are, where those blue mail drop boxes actually picked up in your community?
They weren't. I did not experience that. It's a smaller community, so I mean, if that's a motive to do that, I could see a smaller community like ours probably being shoved down the list. I would think they would start in an area like Minneapolis, St. Paul, if you're going to do something like that. But I do want to say one thing as I was listening to your other two guests is this thought came to mind is, I mean, both of these guys have terrific points. And as I'm listening and knowing what I know, having been on the inside, if you wanted to fix the post office, form a cabinet of the guests that you've had on your show. And I think at some point in time, you're going to, you'll be able to get somewhere, because everybody's had a fair point. And I do want to say one thing too is, they're both right. There's been some issues with the post office. It does need to be fixed. Some of the infrastructure, the tools that were given were, prehistoric dinosaur stuff. Made the job very inefficient. And I could see where if you want to go attack the post office right now, now's the time to do it. You kick it while it's down. But I do think that listening to your two guests, I'm hearing both sides, and I've seen both sides every day. And if you want to fix the post office, I think you have a great discussion among all your guests, and I think you could come to a conclusion on how to do it. I just don't. Some of the changes they're doing right now, the timing is just not. It's not there. Some of these proposed fixes to make it efficient, to fix it, this is not the time to do it.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for your insightful points. Thank you for joining us this morning. We know you have to take off, but again, I want to thank you for sharing your story and being a part of this critical conversation.
Hey, glad to help. Thanks for having me.
All right, Rick, I promised you I would let you make your point. So the floor is yours.
Yeah. So what I want to say, Reva, is if put yourself in the seat of the Postmaster General, not just this Postmaster General, but the prior one. Over the past 10 years, or even longer, while this change in the communications marketplace has been going on, your goal is to reduce cost in order to break even without layoffs. Okay. So how can you reduce costs in your network without laying people off? And that's what you're trying to do. So the removal of those blue collection boxes that are being discussed has been going on for about 10 years now. That was one of the original things. The sorting machine issue is interesting. Maybe Omar knows, but I think the sorting machines may be only able to sort first class mail, which has declined by over 50%. I'm not sure they can sort parcels. That probably has to be done by hand. So if you're this Postmaster General, you want to cut costs and the sorting machines are unutilized, you would do that. The other thing is the overtime. The third thing I'll stop is the overtime pay issue. So if you're trying to avoid layoffs, like, I understand Kevin, I understand his concerns and his irritation with that. But if your goal is to avoid layoffs and you need to cut costs anywhere you can in order to break even in the face of giant annual losses, cutting out overtime pay is a way of doing it, but also you keep employees, right? You don't have to fire people. So I'll just end that as there's a rational, you're an economics major, there's a rational economic answer to these actions that the Postal Service has been taking, which by statute is supposed to be run like a business. So I'll just stop there.
Well, good point, Rick. But I think the thing that's bothering Americans the most is that we have Louis DeJoy, a political lobbyist, not someone who has any prior experience in the Postal Service. And as far as we know, in terms of what's been reported out, there hasn't been any big studies done by DeJoy or his team to, assess what is the best way to meet some of those fiscal issues that you talk about. And I do want you to respond, Omar, about the sorting machines. Are those sorting machines only for first class mail? And has there been such a drop off in first class mail that we don't need those sorting machines?
Actually, those sorting machines are the very kind of machines that sort ballots. Okay, they handle bulky mail. The ones that are being eliminated in the big numbers are the ones that handle bulky first class mail. And the automated flat sorting machines are the machines that handle flats, like ballots are returned in. And then the facer canceling machines that were slated for dismantling are the ones that literally have incoming mail, they face it, and then they give it a postmark. So all that, I mean, whether it's a coincidence or not, I couldn't say. The thing is, if you're going to try to save money, you don't scrap automation that lets you speed up productivity. That doesn't make any sense. And I'm not into all the economics like everybody else may be, but it just doesn't make any sense that you get rid of the machines that speed the process. It takes 2 employees to run that machine. Right now, they took the machines out, and now they have 1 employee running the same number of machines that they normally run because they're just not staffed. And then you have the issue with the pandemic. You have people out, quarantined, sick. We have more than 43,000 postal workers who were affected somewhere or other by the COVID virus. So all this combined, and then you have the manual sortation sections that back up the automated sections. They're being gutted. Went from 12 flat sorting cases to 3. That doesn't, so none of this makes sense to postal workers on the work floor. And then when you raise the alarm, it causes the alarm of the American public. They want their mail, they want their medicines, they want their checks, they want all these things that they get. They even want market ads. As people like to say, we've got complaints from ladies who call in, little old ladies who say, well, where's my mail? I want my market ads. That's their mail, and they don't. And right now, we don't pay for delivery. You don't pay for mail to be delivered. And so it's free delivery. It's been on since the Civil War. I mean, so all these things are America. It's the fabric of America. Don't mess with it. Don't mess with any of it.
I do want to ask you, Omar, and you definitely raise a good point. This is hitting rural communities, it's hitting urban communities. Everybody from veterans who are saying they're not getting their medication. We heard the Veterans Administration actually speak up, as well as Instagram influencers who are selling products online who are saying they can't get their product delivered because what's happening with the post office. But DeJoy, let's talk about what he's done lately. On Tuesday, he walked back and said that some of the changes that he was implementing, the cutting the overtime pay, removing the sorting machines, picking up the collection boxes, he recognized that they gave the appearance of trying to tamper with the November election. Do you have any confidence, Omar, that this walk back means that things will be restored at the post office and that we can have confidence that ballots will be delivered for the November election in a timely way?
Well, actually, he didn't walk back anything. What he did was he stood still. He suspended his pivots. And he said he's going to do it till, after the election. That's what, less than 80 days. So does that mean he's gonna come back and just go ahead and do the dismantling and the destruction into Christmas operations? That makes no sense either. So while we like the fact that he suspended his actions, the fight is by far not over. We got to get the proper funding, but we also got to ensure that the service remains that for the American people beyond the election. Beyond the election, we have Christmas operations. I mean, the post office it delivers anything from market ads to business ads. One of the better ways is direct mail marketing. Of course, a lot of our businesses are suffering right now because of the pandemic, but during regular times, ads from businesses, even in the community, is one of the best ways to advertise your product through the mails. And then we have, if you want to talk about the elections, we have all the campaign material that's going to be going through the mails. And so we're traditionally used to having all hands on deck during the elections, during Christmas, any of those type of operations. And this suspension causes us alarm because, he's only been there for since mid-June, and he's talking like a typical postal manager, saying one thing, doing another. So it remains to be seen exactly what he's going to do. And is he going to put anything back? Is he going to put back the blue boxes? Is he going to bring back and activate those machines that sort bulky mail? Is he going to ensure that the transportation to the delivery units is on time? All these things remain to be seen.
That's a great question, Omar, and everybody's waiting with bated breath to see what the halting or the ceasing of the restructuring looks like, and does it result in restoring anything? I do want to ask you, Rick, though, and I know you said you can't get into the brain of Donald Trump, and I'm not asking you to do so, but he has made public statements. So we can look at what he has said publicly. And we know publicly he said he never met with Louis DeJoy. And then we saw government records, documents that came out that contradicted that showed that he absolutely has met with DeJoy. So do you have any concerns, Rick, again, that this is all being done at a time when we're leading up to this critical November presidential election, and whether it's about fiscal responsibility, there also is the taint that this is a ploy to deny people their rights to vote and to slow the mail down?
Yes, sir, Reva, I want to echo something your earlier guest, Amber, said, about the importance of perceptions. And the Postal Service was created out of the post office to make it more independent of the executive branch, to operate more like a business. So I'm concerned about any actions that, suggest that the Postal Service is being used in a political manner. I've been studying Postal Service since the early 90s. I have tremendous respect for the postal employees like Omar, as well as postal management that has to operate this enormous, far-flung enterprise in the face of a very difficult economic situation. So my hope is that the spirit of the independence that created the Postal Service in 1970, is maintained. And so I don't have any specific information about those interactions other than what I've read in the news. But I really hope that the Postal Service independence is maintained, particularly in the face of the stuff that Omar mentioned just now in terms of election material, in addition to ballots. So I'll just state that.
And I just give you the last word, Omar, for those millions of Americans who are sitting at home, maybe with a letter they want to mail, and who are thinking, why bother? Why bother using the U.S. Postal Service because it's going to take 10 days or 2 weeks to get there? What words of encouragement can you give people at home who wonder about what's going on internally inside post offices all over this country?
Let me start off by saying there are so many federal statutes and laws that protect the sanctity of the mail. We are sworn, we take the same oath of office as the President of the United States takes. We as postal workers ensure the security of that mail. We are opposed, and it goes against our very culture to leave any mail abandoned. And so that we go over and beyond sometimes on our own time to make sure that mail gets processed, delivered to the retail units and out to the streets of people. The postal, and if I could just say real quick, we've been dealing with the politics in the post office for years. George Washington got upset at the Postmaster General when he was president because the Postmaster General took mail from the stagecoach and put it on a horse to expedite it. So we've been dealing with that kind of stuff for a long time. What we don't want is any obstacles. And Kevin, it was Kevin, or I think it was Rick that said, since 1970s, the politics has been out. Yes, it used to be the Postmaster General was a cabinet level officer of the executive branch. No longer that. So we're not used to that kind of politics since the 70s. And so we want to make sure that the post office remains an independent, quasi-government enterprise under the executive branch, but free to do its job. That's what we want.
Well, we have to leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you both so much for being a part of this critical conversation. We'll obviously be following this conversation for a couple of weeks at least, because we know that the Postmaster General Louis DeJoy is going to be sitting down before congressional leaders and a Senate panel to tell the American people what's happening inside these postal offices and what is the post office doing, hopefully, and not doing to slow down the mail leading up to the November election. But again, thank you both for being a part of this morning's conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting.
Well, this is a huge issue. So many people are concerned about what's happening with the post office, and we're trying to take you into the heart of the story. So again, thank you to my guests for joining me this morning. Big shout out to my production team and our sponsors. You can continue to be a part of this conversation by following me on all social platforms at Areva Martin. Before I get out, a couple of words to live by. The reality is people love the post office. It was founded, as Omar just reminded us, in 1775 as a governmental agency. It is now a quasi-governmental agency, and it is America's original communications network. Long before social media and Facebook and Instagram, people used the post office as a means of communication. And postal carriers, as we've heard by Kevin and Omar and Rick, they're dedicated to their mission. My godfather worked for the Postal Service for more than 3 decades. He was so proud of his blue uniform. I actually even still have one of his postal uniform shirts. That was the way he put food on the table for our family. And over 40% of postal workers in this country are African American, Latino Americans, Latin Americans, Asian Americans. And it has always been a pathway into the middle class for this country. And that's why people all over this country have risen up and said they're not going to allow this administration to sabotage the Postal Service. It has a 91% approval rating. People need the post office. They need their medicine. They need their checks. They need their packages. They need their critical supplies, particularly during this period when we are stuck at home because of the pandemic. So efforts to cripple the post office to win an election, those kind of despicable actions by Trump or his agent DeJoy are not going to work. No one is going to allow them to undermine our democratic system of communication and to undermine the post office. And people have responded to these efforts by protesting on social media. They have flooded their senators and their congresspersons' offices with emails and phone calls demanding that something be done. 20 states have even threatened to sue the U.S. Postal Service. And guess what? All of that advocacy has worked. Nancy Pelosi called an emergency hearing. She called Congress back from their recess, from their vacation. She demanded that DeJoy come to the U.S. Capitol to explain his actions and this restructuring that's taking place. So the people have spoken. And in some ways, we can say we've won this battle for now. But as Omar reminded us, it's not so certain that we've won the war. And we can't back down. We can't stop being vigilant about what's happening to the post office, because we don't know what's going to happen without the additional $25 billion in funding that's being requested for the Postal Service. We don't know if those machines that were taken out of those postal offices are going to be returned. We don't know if that overtime that's so critical to our mail being delivered timely is going to be reinstated. And we don't know if those blue collection boxes are going to be restored. We do know that any efforts to stymie or hamper the delivery of ballots for the November election are going to be met with fierce opposition. And if you have any doubts about your ballot, Michelle Obama in her Monday convention speech put it so well. You know, she said, mail in your ballots, mail them in early. But if you have doubts, get your comfortable shoes out, pack you a lunch, get you a warm jacket, and be prepared to stand in line to vote, because this is the most critical election of our lifetime. And as Joe Biden reminds us over and over and over again, this is an election for the soul of our nation. I'm out, y'all. Be safe out there. Don't forget to wear your mask. And remember, we are all in this together.